everybody! Today, Honey is going to read Flat Stanley and the Firehouse. Stanley Lambchop lived with his mother, his father, and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. He had been flat ever since a bulletin board fell on him. Stanley's family found it handy having a flat-body boy at home, and Stanley didn't mind helping out. Stanley held tools for his father while Mr. Lambchop repaired a car. Stanley helped Arthur practice his backflips. Stanley gave Mrs. Lambchop a perfect place to roll out pie crust, except when he felt ticklish. Stanley made a good pencil, too. Hold still, said Arthur. Stanley held his breath as Arthur traced him carefully. Children all over the city were entering a poster contest for Fire Safety Month. I hope we win a trip to the firehouse, said Arthur. Me too, said Stanley. I have always wanted to slide down the pole. The next Monday, a letter arrived. Hey, guess what? Shouted Arthur. Hay is for horses, Mrs. Lambchop said. Try to remember that, dear. Sorry, said Arthur. Guess what? Our poster won the contest. We're going to the firehouse on Saturday. Mrs. Lambchop clapped. I knew you boys have my talent for art, she said proudly. Stanley and Arthur practiced fire drills all week long. Arthur crawled around the house on his hands and knees. Stanley did stop, drop, and roll, mostly the roll. At last, Saturday came. The Lambchops drove to the firehouse. Welcome, bellowed Chef Abbott. A puppy bounced at his feet. Arf, 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 arf. Don't mind Spark, said the chief. He's still in training. Chief Abbott led the Lambchops through the firehouse kitchen. We firefighters cook up some tasty meals, he said. Mr. Lambchop got out his camera. He took a picture of a pot of chili. Everyone went on to the bunk room. Very nice, said Mrs. Lambchop. Can I see the trucks? Said Arthur. Of course, said Chief Abbott. He led everyone down to the garage. Stanley was disappointed. He had wanted to get there by pole. Boots and pants lay on the floor. Oh my, said Mrs. Lambchop. I could tidy up if you'd like. Chief Abbott laughed. We'll leave this out so we can jump into them in an emergency, he said. Neat, said Stanley. Chief Abbott pointed to the ladder truck. Climb on up if you like. Wow, said Arthur. The boys scrambled onto the truck. Spark was right behind them. Suddenly the alarm bell rang. Chef, code 9 on Oak Street, called a firefighter. The chef turned to the Lambchops. How would you folks like to come along on a rescue? A rescue? Will it be safe? Asked Mr. Lambchop. You bet, said Chief Abbott. Code 9 means a cat up a tree. Probably Furlball again. Mr. Lambchop looked at his wife. She gave a little nod. Yes, yelled Stanley and Arthur. Stanley, turn on the siren! Arthur, hit the lights! Shouted Chef Abbott. My goodness, is that necessary? Asked Mrs. Lambchop. No, said Chef Abbott. It's just more fun this way. The truck raced out of the station. Soon, it pulled up to a tall tree. A tiny cat shivered at the top. She's pretty high up this time, said Chef Abbott. Spark panted at the chief's feet. All right, let's get her down. 2 firefighters raised the ladder. Lambchops moved out of the way. Chief Abbott climbed until Furlball was just a few feet away. Good kitty, he said, stretching out his hands. Come here, Fireball. Spark started to bark. Arf, arf, arf. For a second, Fireball froze. Then she jumped the other way. Fireball! Cried Chief Abbott. He was too late. Fireball was heading for the ground. The lamb chops looked up. Their mouths were open in surprise. All at once, Stanley threw himself onto the grass. Grab my hands, he told his mother. Mrs. Lambchop grabbed his hands. Grab my feet, he told Arthur, but Arthur didn't move. Hey, shouted Mrs. Lambchop at the top of her lungs. Grab his feet! Arthur blinked. He grabbed Stanley's feet. Fetch! Cried Stanley. Arthur and Mrs. Lambchop stretched Stanley between them. They were not a second too soon. Boing! Meow! Fireball bounced on Stanley's belly, then landed safely on the ground. The firefighters started clapping. Arthur and Mrs. Lambchop stood Stanley back up. Arthur looked at his mother. Hay is for horses, he said. Remember? Mrs. Lambchop grinned. Good work, Lambchop, said Chef Abbott, racing over. How can we ever thank you? Well, said Stanley, there is one thing. Whee!